Now in Revelation 18, we get to the fall of Mystery Babylon and whether America is Babylon the Great. So that's the question that we're going to be asking today. But let's go ahead and begin with Revelation 18:1. And it says, "And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory." And so if you remember in the last chapter, in the previous chapters, the Apostle John was given a vision of the seven angels who had the seven vials, which filled up the wrath of God. And then the Apostle John was taken aside by one of these angels, and we step back in the biblical timeline just a tad to get greater insight into the religious harlot and the false worldwide religion of Mystery Babylon. That's what we covered in chapter 17, which, as we covered historically, has been the Roman Catholic Church, but in the end times will be a conglomerate of the false global one-world religion of the Antichrist and the false prophet. Now, in the current chapter, in chapter 18, John is taken aside by one of the angels with the seven last plagues. Again, that one of those angels, the same angels of the end times, of those last vile judgments, come to John, and that angel shows John the destruction of Mystery Babylon the Great. And so, who is Mystery Babylon, or Babylon the Great? Now, you may have heard the claim that America doesn't appear anywhere in biblical prophecy, especially in the last days. And this is a valid claim because even though America has played a major role throughout modern history and has in many ways accelerated the Antichrist and the beast system, globally, throughout the world, as we're seeing, especially in the West, in the Western nations, with their political, biases and political agendas going out throughout the world. And, despite all of that, there really is not one passage that we can turn to definitively and say, here's America in biblical prophecy. Here is the United States depicted in the end times. So we just don't have any specific verses that we can point to or passages and say, there's America in the very last days, or here's America throughout biblical prophecy and history. Here's a verse that shows what's going to happen to America in the end times. It just doesn't exist, right? And that's a bit odd. Because, considering America's role and great influence in the globalist world order that they've brought about, that we've brought about, that we're witnessing begin to come to pass. I mean, America is the leader of the free world, right? That's what we've been dubbed. And we've even dubbed ourselves the world police and the liberators of backwards, undeveloped, and uncivilized and undemocratic nations, where we have to bring our democracy and our way of life and our social order and all of our social agendas to every other nation on earth. That's been the role. We have military bases all around the world, and our ungodly social programs are being disseminated through the media, through movies, through political propaganda, throughout the entire known world. America, in modern times, has been the number one destabilizer of foreign nations, especially in the Middle East, where we know now that wars have been fought for oil and for control and power in the region. Money, the filthy lucre, as the Bible says. And our CIA has toppled regimes for our own personal gain. We even, have information now that our own CIA assassinated Kennedy. Richard Nixon himself came out and said, I know who did it. It was Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the vice president at the time, and it was the help of the CIA and the various alphabet agencies, assassinated our own president. We probably assassinated MLK Jr., Malcolm X, probably every political assassination where we're like, that was tragic, was probably ourselves. And so that's what we're beginning to see. That's what's beginning to come to light. We're the number one financial supporter of all ongoing foreign wars. Okay, every single war being fought today across the globe, America has its hand in it. We're the #1 exporter of porn, of LGBTism, the LGBT cult, of abortion on demand, of gender confusion, of endless wars, of COVID tyranny, and so much more. You know, we were behind the COVID tyranny. We had our labs in China. It wasn't China, it was us. We were funding it. It was Anthony Fauci that was funding all of that. And then, of course, you know, the Western nations had the strictest restrictions that we've ever seen, especially in places like Australia and Canada and the UK. And it wasn't, you know, much better here. We had to stand up and to resist. I mean, you can't get any more totalitarian and authoritarian than telling people you have to stay in your homes and you can't come out without our permission, or that you have to take X, Y, and Z, you know, jab to be to work or to live. And so, you know, we saw real authoritarianism here. And so, you know, yet you can't point to a single passage in Scripture and say, there's America. There's America in the Bible, and here's her role in the end times. And so this leaves us with a couple of options concerning the United States. Number one, the first option is that America will be destroyed long before the start of the tribulation. That's one outcome that could be. Why are we not in the end time Scripture? Because we won't exist when that comes around. Now, that could be way down the road. It could be 500 years from now. We don't know when the end times will be. It certainly feels like it's around the corner, but God often stays His hand of judgment and gives us more time. But you know, if, you know, that's option number one, is that America will simply cease to exist. You know, empires rise and empires always eventually fall. It's just a matter of when. And we're seeing the decline of America, you know, right now in our midst. And so unless things turn around in this once great nation, and unless we turn back to God as a people and as Christians, America is clearly in decline. You know, the verse of the decade, perhaps the verse of our generation, has been 2 Chronicles 7:14. I know you'd like that, Brother Steve. That's a great verse. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. This is addressed to my people. If my people, it depends on us. It depends on the church, yet we find ourselves in the midst of the apostasia, the great falling away of the church. And so things look bleak, you know. And so, you know, but the fact is, America has not wholeheartedly repented. There has not been a great national revival, the one that we've been talking about since I was in church in the 1980s. You know, we always talked about revival is coming to America. I didn't believe it then. Sadly, you know, I could just see the state of the world, and it doesn't look well, you know, for great national revival today. Although we do see many people waking up, right? A lot of people have been waking up, at least to the political dilemma that, you know, forsaking God has caused, right? At least people are waking up politically. Now, some are waking up spiritually, but I wouldn't call it a great revival at this point. But it does give us some hope, gives us some hope for the future. But is it enough? You know, have enough people turn to Jesus Christ as their one and only God and Savior? That's what it'll take for the vast majority of Americans. But it does give us some hope. But there's no doubt that America's decline, that America is in decline, and the youth and the average citizen can't even earn a living wage. You know, wages just can't keep up with the level of inflation that money printing causes, right? Inflation is out of control. You know, we're a deprived mess socially, financially, psychologically, and there's a severe mental health crisis which has even overtaken our youth, especially all the trans youth and kids, and even our military has gone woke, right? I mean, just look at these fake sodomite generals and admirals dressed up as women, pretending that they're ladies, like Richard Levine, you know, who goes by his trans name, Rachel Levine. but he's actually Richard. And not only will I not call you by your preferred pronoun, I'm not even going to go and acknowledge your name change because it's delusion, right? And so you need psychological help. I'm not going to feed into your delusion. I'm going to advise that you go and get help. You know, speaking the truth to people is how we can love and help them. Acknowledging, their delusion and affirming their delusion only hurts people. And so if you really love the trans community, if you really love LGBT people, tell them the truth instead of, covering up, the truth and acknowledging their lies. And so are we supposed to feel confident potentially starting World War III with these clowns in charge of our military? I mean, it's a joke. We've become the laughingstock of the world under the fraudulent Biden administration. There's no way that clown in the White House is legitimate. I'm going to have to bleep this out, unfortunately, for YouTube. But they used to say that no one respected Trump on the world stage in the international community. That was the leftist narrative, the liberal narrative. No one's going to respect Trump. But they were just referring to soy boy leaders like Justin Trudeau of Canada or that effeminate French guy, Emmanuel Macron. But none of those guys mattered. That's who they were saying, Macron isn't going to respect us. Trudeau isn't going to respect us. Who cares, right? Their opinion of Trump was irrelevant. What, was France or Canada going to do to the United States of America? Who cares what the dictator Trudeau thinks about our president? You know who mattered, we found out, was Vladimir Putin. Okay, who did actually respect President Trump, who did get along with Trump and kept the peace, right? There was no new wars when President Trump was in office. The economy was thriving. People were happier. There was less crime. There were, minorities were better employed than they are today. Wages were trying to keep up with the economy. It still wasn't perfect, but it was much better for the average worker, for the average person under Trump. Now it's 10 times worse than it ever was. And so we had started to go in the right direction. We're building, the economy was the strongest ever, and then they hit us with COVID as the pandemic that we knew. And so, he would have, Vladimir Putin would have never even considered invading Ukraine at that time, or Hamas. We look at Hamas now, who never would have dared to attack Israel when President Trump was in office. They were silent. I mean, I didn't even hear about Hamas. Where was Hamas? They were quiet the entire time until Biden comes. So weak leadership produces evil, produces, the instability in the nations. And so America, despite all this, doesn't even directly appear in biblical prophecy. Why is that? We're a major force in the world, in modern times. Is it because America will fall and be no more by the time we get to the last days? That's certainly a possibility, and we're in decline. Or is it because, number two, the second option is that America is Mystery Babylon the Great. And we are in Scripture, it's just that we're referred to as Mystery Babylon. Just not as we thought, not in the way that we'd hoped, not in the way that we thought. And so I'm going to make the case today that if America is still around during the end times, that America is Mystery Babylon, or the head of the beast system, and will be destroyed in a single day, in 1 hour, during the latter end of God's wrath. And so we'll get to that today. And this angel comes down to earth in Revelation 18:1, and it says that the earth was lightened with his glory. And so this portion of the wrath of God, like much of the rest, will be a very visible event that the entire world will clearly see and cannot deny. It says the angel comes down to the earth. The whole earth is lit up with the glory of God and the glory of that angel representing God. And it's all lit up with God's glory. And as we've covered, this all occurs during the period known as God's wrath and not the tribulation. And so Mystery Babylon, whoever she may be, whether America or a future nation that takes her place, after our own destruction, will also be destroyed once and for all during God's wrath. This is once the church has been safely gathered together or raptured out prior to the destruction of Babylon the Great at the very end of the tribulation. This is after the angels, pour out their vials, and then they go back and say, well, look, this is how these vials are going to affect Mystery Babylon. It's the very end of the wrath of God. They step back and give us greater insight and greater detail into the wrath of God. And so when the Bible talks about the destruction of Mystery Babylon, if your position is that Babylon the Great is America in the end times, a position that many are increasingly taking, then you need to understand that Christian believers will not be here when America is finally destroyed in one single hour. So we can take comfort in that. Our nation, if we're Babylon, is not going to be destroyed until the wrath of God, but the decline up until that point can still be very horrific, very tyrannical, and very, very horrific. And so Revelation 18:2 then says of the angel, and he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils and the hold of every foul spirit and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. And so this is a description of the fallen state of Babylon. The fact that it's become a habitation of devils suggests that Babylon, once a place of might and splendor and glory, and initially a force for good in the world, which is what America, I firmly believe, has been, has now become a dwelling place for demonic forces to inhabit. And this is already beginning to happen. We're already seeing it everywhere. I mean, it's increasing. And so would you say that America is less or more demonic than it once was in its former days? Even since Biden took office, it's way worse, right? Or from when we were kids or when we were in high school, right? America has drastically fallen since that point. The fact that it's a hold for every foul spirit emphasizes the complete overrun of Babylon by malevolent forces and malevolent spirits, demonic forces. This underscores that not only is the physical city of Babylon or the nation state of Babylon destroyed, but has also become 100% morally and spiritually desolate. And that's a direction that we're seeing the Western world as a whole go through with America as its head. And Isaiah 1:4 says, "Ah, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger. They are gone away backward." And that's exactly what we see happening in our decline. This describes exactly what happens to nations who succumb to evil and fall. They become a habitation of devils. When God leaves, God is inhabiting the place. God leaves, he forsakes us, and then devils come in. He doesn't forsake us personally, the church, we're raptured out, but then the devils will take over that void when God is gone, when the church is gone. When we're gone, now those spirits have free reign. And so this is what we're seeing increasingly occur in the United States. And so what does it mean that Babylon has become the cage of every unclean and hateful bird? Well, birds in the Bible possess various symbolic meaning. But in the context of judgment, birds often represent impure and evil forces. Okay, unclean birds in particular can allude to the detestable and immoral practices and entities that Babylon stands for. Okay, the adjective hateful, about hateful birds, suggests that these are not only unclean and impure demonic forces, that's ultimately what it's describing, but also malevolent. They're malevolent and actively harmful entities operating within the auspices of Babylon that are persecuting God's people. And so Babylon becomes the habitation of devils and of harmful authoritarian entities and organizations that hate and detest and persecute God's people. And so that's what we see now in many of our leaders, politicians, and worldwide organizations. I mean, think about Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables line, right? They hate half of the country, first of all. They hate regular working class American people. They think that we're beneath them. They're always trying to make decisions, and they say it's for your own good, like we need their advice, like they're our parents and we're like little dumb kids or something, and because we just don't know any better. And so we're doing all this, we're censoring you for your own good. We're going to regulate what you hear and what you think about because we know better than you. It's like when Obama said about hardworking Americans. Remember when he said this? He said, and it's not surprising then that they get bitter, speaking about us, speaking about Trump voters, speaking about conservatives. He says, it's not surprising then that they get bitter and that they cling to guns or religion or antipathy toward people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-trade sentiment as a way to explain their frustrations, right? Remember when he just talked about us clinging to our guns and our religion like that's a bad thing, right? And we're not anti-immigrant. We just don't want illegal criminals to come through the border without being vetted. You've got child sex traffickers coming through. You've got, drug lords coming through. I mean, we just need a little filter there to keep out the bad guys. That's all we're saying. Or remember when Biden said to that hardworking Detroit auto factory worker, I don't work for you. He literally said that. And then he said, you're full of, is what he said to this, Detroit auto worker. And he's right. Joe Biden is right. Joe Biden and the Democrats don't work for the regular, hardworking American people. They're narcissistic. They're out of touch. They're power hungry, and they're full of demons. These are the hateful birds. These are the unclean spirits working through them. And so Revelation 18:3 then says of Babylon, for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. So when we read passages like this, you can see why many people believe that America is Babylon the Great, if we're in the end times. If we're not, the whole landscape could look completely different. But if we are, there's no other candidate that really fits the bill. Now, some people believe that the original Babylon will be rebuilt and inhabited again, and that this is speaking of the literal city of Babylon, and that Babylon of Revelation is not just emblematic of the New World Order governance that we're seeing is led by the U.S., but is like an actual rebuilt city, the New Babylon. Some believe that it's the original Babylon rebuilt and inhabited as the New Babylon, but there's a major problem with this interpretation. And that's because the Bible is clear that Babylon will never again be rebuilt or inhabited once it was destroyed. That original Babylon. And that was actually a picture of the, spiritual Babylon, of the end times Babylon, ultimately, eventually being destroyed and never inhabited again. So the whole nation, the original nation of Babylon being destroyed, was a prototype of America in essence, or whoever the Babylon is in the end times. And so Babylon was destroyed in 539 BC by Cyrus the Great of Persia, as we studied back in the book of Daniel. And Isaiah 13, 19 through 20 says this of Babylon. It says, in Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember, it's going to be like Sodom and Gomorrah in the end times, the days of Lot, right? And so it's the same pattern that we see. In verse 20, it shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation, right? So it says when Babylon, the literal Babylon fell, It's over. It'll never be rebuilt. It'll never be inhabited. Today, Babylon is an archaeological site and a tourist attraction in modern-day Turkey, but it's not a city that is inhabited. In fact, before Saddam Hussein was removed from power, remember the former president of Iraq, he was in the middle of attempting to restore and to rebuild the ancient Mesopotamian city of Babylon. That was in his plans. He was literally attempting to rebuild it. This occurred in the 1980s as Saddam Hussein tried to associate himself and draw a parallel between his rule and that of the great Nebuchadnezzar II, the greatest of all Babylonian kings that we read about in Daniel. But his project was met with many challenges and difficulties right from the onset. And the final nail in the coffin was the Gulf War and the removal of Saddam Hussein in 2003. Right? Remember the weapons of mass destruction? That didn't exist, apparently. But Saddam attempted to rebuild Babylon, and he was struck down and removed before he could do so. So despite our misgivings about the Gulf War, in hindsight, it appears to have been an act of providence and a fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy. Saddam could not rebuild Babylon because Isaiah said so thousands of years before. And so, but Babylon does appear here now in Revelation. And so we have to ask then whether Babylon is a literal city or emblematic, which I believe of the New World Order and the globalist one world rule of the Antichrist. Of course, there will be a literal city or a nation state, a country that will also be destroyed, that is Babylon. But ultimately, I believe that it represents the globalist system of control and domination run by the Antichrist and the false prophet. And so to that, the answer is it's both. It's a literal city, but it's also emblematic of the one world order. It will be a literal city or perhaps nation state like America. Otherwise, how would it be destroyed, as we'll read in one single hour? There has to be something to be destroyed. But it's also clearly representative of the globalist Antichrist system because the literal city of Babylon will never again be inhabited. Now, the roots of Babylon go all the way back to the Tower of Babel, when Nimrod built a ziggurat, or an ancient pagan temple. That's what that is. It's these like various stages and steps that go up to the heavens that he intended to reach the height of heaven with. If you remember that account in Genesis, the account of Tower of Babel is in Genesis 11. Let's just read a short portion of that. Genesis 11, 4 through 7 says, "And they said, 'Go to, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth.'" That was globalist humanity in its prime. That was the whole world united together against God under the leadership of Nimrod, who was the first global leader. Verse 5, "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one." See, there's that unity, that globalism. "And they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down." And by the way, that "let us" is a reference to the Trinity. Right there in the Old Testament, you've got us, just like God made man in our image and our likeness. You've got the Trinity there. But he says, "Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." Now, you would think that in an ideal world, global unity would be a good thing, right? We want world peace, right? Every American beauty pageant contestant, what do you want? What do you want for the world? I want world peace, right? So that was like the canned answer, but that's what it seems like. Yeah, world peace. That's a good thing. Why don't we all unite? Why don't all the nations unite? Together, and let's just work together and bring about peace. Well, that's Antichrist talk, believe it or not, because we live in a fallen state and power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so when you have a one world leader ruling over everybody, you're going to have a dictator. You're going to have tyranny. You're going to have the Antichrist. And so God, seeing that humanity had united as one, he goes down to confound or to confuse their language. Hence the name Babel, right? Meaning confusion. And that's where the religion of Mystery Babylon originated, from the Tower of Babel, which led to all of the false religions that came after it. And so Mystery Babylon is ultimately emblematic of all false religion, of every false religion, of the New World Order, of the political globalist system. And so this was globalism at the Tower of Babel in its earliest stages, man united in a fallen world under a one world global leader named Nimrod. And so in the same way, the Babylon of Revelation is a picture of mankind united globally under the Antichrist. So Nimrod was a prototype of the Antichrist. And so in this way, Mystery Babylon is a symbol of the corrupt, seductive, and idolatrous system of the world that opposes God and his ways. And so again, that's why we saw, her pictured as a harlot in chapter 17. This harlot, this false religion, riding the system of the beast, riding the beast itself. And so the Tower of Babel was likely a ziggurat, which I mentioned, which was a temple to the gods of heaven, or the demons that Nimrod was trying to ascend to. This was the foundation for the religion of Mystery Babylon, and it was tied to astrology and celestial divination. It had these terrace-leveled steps, and each level was a tribute to a celestial body or various levels of false gods. This is like the pagan, religion of that time. And it was an attempt to access the divine or the patron deity of the city. And the whole thing was just very demonic, which is why God put a stop to it. Revelation 18, 4-5 then says, "And I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues, for her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities.'" And so if this is all occurring right after the tribulation, the great tribulation during God's wrath, once the church has been raptured out, who and when is this speaking about? Right? He's saying to come out of Babylon so that you don't partake of her sins. So how can God's people come out if they've already been raptured? Well, this is the Bible speaking to us now. Okay? As saints who are in the world, currently living within the developing beast system. Okay, the beast system is being built right now. And we are being warned to separate from the world and the Antichrist system. And so for those of us who believe the rapture occurs after the tribulation, this verse is a literal and urgent command for believers now to disassociate from the corrupt systems and practices of Babylon and the world system. And so we're to be separate and holy. It's like when Peter said in 1 Peter 2:9, "But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, an holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." So we're called to be separate. If there's one thing about Christians, if you want to do God's will, is separate yourself from the world and from the ideology and the ways of the world. Be Christians. Don't be worldly. And so we're to separate and to go against the trends, to go against the grain of this world, because this world propagates evil. It promotes evil under the guise of humanism. It's just all about equality and this and that, but it's really not. It's not really what it's about. It's really about undermining godly ways and the godly family. And so people just go with the flow, and they get caught up in the latest trends, and whatever the latest thing is, and whatever the latest war is, or the latest protest. But God has called us to stand up, to stand apart, to be separate and holy as lights in a world of darkness, to be contrarian, and to stand in opposition to the Antichrist spirit, which is already operating throughout the world. God says in Revelation 18, 6-7, "Reward her even as she rewarded you. and double unto her double according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously. That describes America today. So much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen and am no widow and shall see no sorrow. Isn't that how we all felt prior to 9/11? Like we were untouchable. Nothing could come and attack the United States. I mean, no war could ever touch our soil. But it is arrogance. And so doesn't that describe America and the West and our narcissistic culture? We've glorified ourselves and we've lived lavishly and we think that nothing can touch us and no one can attack us, that we're exempt from the effects of all the wars of the military-industrial complex that we ourselves are funding, but it's beginning to come back and to bite us. And, think about the student protests over Gaza. I explained to one Gaza supporter that whether Israel is committing a genocide or not, okay, it's not any of our business. Okay, it's just not our business. We shouldn't be involved in these ongoing, endless globalist wars. And you know what his answer was to me? And he was right. His answer was that we are involved because we're the ones that are funding these wars. We're the ones who continue to support them and create the instability, and all of our money's going to it, but then we want to stay out of it. Now, I'm against funding them. I'm an isolationist, I'm basically an American isolationist. I believe that, our military should only be for the purpose of defending the United States border. And that's the one thing we're failing to do, right? So, but whether we like it or not, what's that?
We're worried about everybody else.
Yeah, everyone else's border needs to be secured but ours. So whether we like it or not, we are involved against our will, and the will of the people because of poor leadership, because we have power-hungry criminals in charge, laundering our money and making money through their deals. And, these are people who should be tried for crimes against humanity, yet they're our leaders. And so I'm all for defunding all money and all aid to all foreign nations. Let's just put a stop to all of it for a minute. Let's examine. Let's self-reflect. Let's look at our budget. Let's get our own house in order before we start giving aid to other nations. And our aid is military aid, today. It's not like we're giving food to people and helping people. So we need to be focused right here and now on the USA and get our own house in order. I don't care if it's Israel. I don't care if it's Ukraine. I want to be focused right here on the USA. Stop funding wars. I don't care which war it is. These are the wars of the Antichrist nations. That's the thing. Once you realize the wars, the nations are Antichrist nations. Why do the nations rage, right? Why do the heathen rage against God and His anointed? All the nations have become Antichrist nations today. This is what the nations of the world do. They start wars. They kill people for money. They conquer, they kill. They start wars. But Jesus said, we are not of this world. My kingdom is not of this kingdom. And so that's my position on wars. It's not my kingdom. These are not my wars. I just want peace. I don't want to fund any of it. And so I don't have, allegiance other than, my allegiance is to Christ. Spiritually, my national allegiance is to America and America alone. And that's why I'm America first. Now, God is way above my political ideology, but that's why I'm America first. And if every nation was their own nation first, and we all just kept to ourselves and didn't bother each other and just only traded, all we did was trade and nothing else, we'd all have peace. There would be peace. We're always meddling in other nations' affairs. And so God is going to return double the plagues and the evil that Babylon has propagated throughout the world in all of its history. Revelation 18:8 through 10 describes next the sudden destruction of Babylon. Verse 8, therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judgeth her, and the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. So Babylon will fall in 1 single hour, and it says with fire. So there's going to be a judgment of fire that destroys the entire city of Babylon, or the entire nation state of Babylon, in 1 hour. Her sudden destruction will come, it'll be swift. And now the only way that a major city or country like Babylon, who is the center of commerce, could be destroyed in 1 single hour can only explained through nuclear war. And so I believe that if America is Babylon, that America will finally be destroyed by nuclear warheads in 1 single day. In fact, it says in 1 single hour. How else can an entire nation be destroyed or an entire city be destroyed in 1 hour but by nuclear arsenals? And so is America Babylon? Now, the first time that I heard that theory, I thought, no way, I didn't want to accept it. Not because I had evidence against it, but because I'm a patriot and I love America. I love our founding ideals, but this is not the America of yesteryear. We are not living in the America of our founding fathers or even in the America of our childhood. America has transformed drastically, especially over the last few decades. And especially since Obama took office, and then now it's exponentially, accelerating with Biden. And so for decades, I've been warning against the impending judgment of God against America. I could see the writing on the wall when you consider that we have close to 1 million abortions annually, every single year, 1 million. Think about that. 1 million babies are murdered in this country every single year. In 22 alone, there were over 900,000 abortions in the USA. Today, it's more. When you consider that we're the #1 exporter of the LGBT cult religion in the entire world, and when we're the #1 exporter of global abortions on demand, our goal in the West and in America is to spread our ideals, our liberal views globally. And this is arrogant global hegemony. We just want everyone to be like us. Everyone needs to have our values, and our values are wicked. They're not godly anymore because our leaders and liberal establishment consider LGBTism a human right, and they think that abortion is health care. And so they see these as universal rights that are required for not only America, but for all nations, that must be instituted at all costs because it's a matter of justice to them. It's a matter of these are human rights is from their satanic perspective, from their deluded perspective. That's how they see it. In their world, the end justifies the means. So they'll lie, they'll cheat, they'll steal, all for the so-called greater good, as they propagate satanic propaganda throughout the entire world. Never mind that other nations are sovereign and should be left alone and given autonomy, and other cultures should respect other cultures and other views, but no, we have to go in with the LGBT stuff into every country on earth. And so, we have to impose our liberalism and queerness all around the globe. And so we're the #1 spreader of the LGBT cult and abortion across the world. Could we be Babylon? It certainly looks like it, right? If the end times are in our lifetime, again, I see no other possibility. Consider that the UN headquarters is in New York City. We're the head of the UN and all the globalist organizations like the WEF and the WHO and the UN and all the others who are attempting to make our life miserable, so that we can own nothing and be happy, as Klaus Schwab says, and have dominance over our every movement and thought. That's why they hate free speech and they seek to ban it and to take away our sovereignty and our liberties. We have had, we're the head. We have had the head table, the head seat at the WHO and the WEF and the UN. And so this is why when our destruction comes, all the kings will wail. You know, they say they hate us right now, but they depend on us for their sustenance. And so they'll see the fall of the once great United States of America because of our exceeding globalist influence over all the nations, and they'll wail. You know, and so this is why Revelation 18:11 through 13 says, "And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more, the merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and of pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all fine wood and all manner of vessels of ivory and all manner of vessels of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil, and fine flour and wheat, and beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves, the souls of men." Who do you think Apple employs to mine lithium, you know, across the globe, right? They've got literal slaves today mining, you know, the lithium and other resources so that we can go on our iPhone and complain about, you know, how it's not fair for trans rights in this other country or something on our, you know, with, as we sip our, you know, Starbucks, you know, coffee and have our capitalist laptop as we complain about capitalism. So, you know, that's the state of the world. I mean, we have all this stuff. We have slaves, in essence, still, and our own government institutions are currently involved in human trafficking and slavery. You know, think about Jeffrey Epstein's client list. Has anyone from that list been revealed? A single one? Has anyone been arrested? Why are the elites being protected by the CIA and the FBI and all the corrupt alphabet agencies? Right? I mean, it's crazy. So Revelation 18:14 through 19, "And the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all the things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. The merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And every shipmaster and all the company in ships and sailors and as many as trade by sea stood afar off and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? What nation has truly been like America? Right? Verse 19, and they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour is she made desolate. So think about all the ports and all the merchants who have been made rich with trade with America, by trade with America. Think about all the cheap and plastic junk that we buy from China that is transported in ships and massive shipping containers to the U.S. All those ships, all those goods coming to the U.S. You know, when we're gone, who's going to buy all those goods? And so all the merchants are going to wail and cry. No one's going to buy our stuff anymore. You know, America was our number one client. And so these merchants who were made rich by America will now wail because of her destruction, because of the fall of America, which will affect the financial status of the entire world. You know, everyone will weep and wail because if we go, everyone goes, right? We're holding it all up right now, and that's why they want to get rid of us. And so, you know, even America's enemies are made rich by her. Revelation 18:20 through 21, Rejoice over her, thou heaven. Now he's speaking to the saints. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. So God wants us as saints to rejoice at the fall of Babylon eventually, because it's Babylon, it's Mystery Babylon that through the ages has been persecuting and killing the Christians and the saints, right? And that spirit of Mystery Babylon. has overtaken the U.S. And so this is vengeance from God for all the holy prophets and apostles who were slain and persecuted by Babylon throughout the ages. Babylon is a concept. It's a religion. It's not just a nation. It's an idea, a set of ideals that are contrary to the Word of God and His ways. And so an angel throws a great stone. It says like a millstone into the sea. And I don't think that's accidental that a millstone is finally used to destroy Babylon. And if that's us, to destroy America. This is very familiar to us because Matthew 18:6 says, "But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea." And so there's an association with that millstone in Scripture. Again, I think of the almost 65 million abortions that have occurred in America since Roe versus Wade. 65, just in America, not the world, just in America. Thank God that Roe versus Wade was overturned, and that happened because of Trump's Supreme Court, although abortions continue today. It's just now been handed over to the states to decide. It's a step in the right direction, but the battle is not even close to being won. And so, you think about the imagery of the millstone, and it's irrefutable that abortion will play a major role in the destruction of America and or Babylon, along with the LGBT cult religion of the Antichrist. The LGBT cult is really a cult. It's become the whole left, the whole liberal ideology, they've become cultish. It's just like, what's the latest thing? What do you want us to protest now? What do you want us to think today? Let's get on our phones and just let's see, right? So it's become a cult. Revelation 18:22 through 24 ends the chapter and the destruction of Babylon. And the voice of harpers and musicians and of pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee, and no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be shall be any more in thee. The sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee, and the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. There's the candle, the light of the church will be gone and extinguished, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived, and in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. And so how many deaths is America really responsible for? It's a hard question, to consider. Taking out the millions upon millions of babies and abortions, I think about all the wars and the instability that we've created in foreign nations. We're behind pretty much every war in modern times, whether directly through military aid or indirectly through funding. And so it certainly looks like we are Babylon, that America, what it has become, not our ideals, not what America was, but we're certainly on that path. And so to conclude, if we're close to entering the last days, there's no better candidate than the once greatest and most powerful nation on earth to lead the way of the world into the one world rule of the Antichrist, making us Mystery Babylon. And so you think about America's economic wealth, materialism, being the richest country on earth. Revelation 18:3 again, the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Describes America perfectly. We think about the spiritual and moral decline, of America. We are Mystery Babylon in that sense. We think about the extensive cultural output of America, which is causing moral decay not only nationally but globally. We're already becoming a habitation of devils and of every foul and hateful bird. And so God have mercy on America and its people. Let's end with a parallel to the destruction of Babylon from Isaiah 47, 5 through 11. I'll just read a handful of verses from that section. Verse 5, "Sit thou silent, and get thee into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms, Verse 7, and thou saidst, I shall be a lady forever. The Statue of Liberty just comes to mind, right? And thou said, I shall be a lady forever, so that thou didst not lay these things to thy heart, neither didst remember the latter end of it. Verse 9, but these two things shall come to thee in a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood. They shall come upon thee in their perfection for the multitude of thy sorceries and for the great abundance of thine enchantments. For thou hast trusted in thy wickedness. Thou hast said, none seeth me. Thy wisdom and thy knowledge, it hath perverted thee. And thou hast said in thine heart, I am, and none else beside me. Therefore shall evil come upon thee. Thou shalt not know from whence it riseth, and mischief shall fall upon thee, that thou shalt not be able to put it off, and desolation shall come upon thee suddenly, which thou shalt not know.